Hello, I'm Logue, and this is Let's Talk Consciousness, the ongoing set of videos where I discuss pretty much anything and everything that I can relate to consciousness. And the reason I think that's important is that I like to play with the assumption, a little more than play, but I like to work with the assumption that the entire universe as we know it, reality itself, is a manifestation of consciousness, and that we are uh, at the same time creating it and partaking of it. And that's a kind of a strange idea if you're from a more Western philosophy point of view, but if you're looking at a little bit of a different point of view from either Eastern philosophy, New Age movement, or certain parts of science, particularly as it relates to parapsychology and quantum physics. So if you're looking at some of these different angles on reality and you want to know what you do with that, how does your day-to-day life look if you're trying to shape a model of the world based on consciousness being primary reality, I'll keep this brief, but my basic takeaway from that is that all things seem to lead back to unconditional love and forgiveness for yourself and for others. I think that that is the kind of trajectory that we're all on as far as our conscious development. But that being said, you are forced to deal with the mundane aspects of life, and what do you do with that? And so a part of it, just a part, not the whole thing, but a part of it is looking at conspiracy theories, in my personal opinion. And I think aside from that, there's also a thing that's happening right now that is perhaps so important that really a lot of people on YouTube accounts might benefit from putting the pause button on what they're doing to maybe take a look at some of these things, because it's something that we benefit from having it discussed, and that is Q Anon. Not everybody takes it seriously that it is what it appears to be. I am looking at it in a few videos so far, taking it at face value that it is not a LARP, that it is an actual disclosure from somebody within the military intelligence community that is actually party to these things that are happening. And when you see these posts that are basically a set of riddles or a puzzle, a set of questions that many people, particularly in this community of ideas, can parse out what these things mean, and from there can build a context of what seems to be going on, and then confirm it by looking at the news and seeing how the news seems to confirm, to line up with these disclosures. So that being said, November 30th, there was a new one. I haven't seen as many people talking about this one in depth, but then again, I can't be everywhere on YouTube, and there's other places, obviously Twitter and things like that. So I might be covering a well-worn path, but if not, hopefully I have something of value to contribute. So without further ado, the November 30th Q posts, I believe this one was on 8chan rather than 4chan, which might have people questioning its authenticity, but we're just discussing it at this point. So I'm not necessarily going to go through every single line, but I'll get to the points that I think are important and some that I think are neglected in other videos where I have seen it discussed. So the first part is focusing on Barack Obama. It's the first line is focus on Hussein, revelations coming very soon, or very, very soon. Huma, essay, Hussein. As far as the meaning of those essays, Saudi Arabia, that's pretty easy. Hussein, Barack Hussein Obama. Huma could either be Uma Ahmadine, or I've heard actually another theory on that, and I don't recall if it was Jordan Sather or Tracy Beans or any number of other people who've been talking about this at length, that Huma is possibly the person, Huma Abedin, but also possibly an organization, and I cannot remember, nor could I find an obvious reference to that acronym applying to a group that, if I remember correctly, it was a kind of similar to Muslim Brotherhood, that it was something along those lines. But if anybody knows and is familiar with that and can share it in the comments, I'd appreciate it. And then another part of it that I had a little bit of a question mark, and then the rest of it seems to be pretty clear. But the line HLR, so it's saying focus on Barack Obama, understand the connection between Saudi Arabia, and Barack Obama, which I think from the other key posts we get pretty clearly that Barack Obama was supported by very wealthy Saudi elites who wanted to help him get into the position he was in, so that he, obviously would be indebted to them, and that's a familiar way of doing things. That's not new. So the connection between these three entities, what is it? We know from the context that it is kind of a corruption, cooperating in some sort of corruption. HLR parentheses first. I'm not sure. I did look this up just because nothing came to mind for HLR right off the bat. The first reference that's related to military or government is high-level review, which is in reference to sanctions. The decision to apply sanctions goes through high-level review, or is done by high-level reviewer. At least that was just a basic web search that I was able to find that. So admittedly, I don't know for sure what that one's referring to, but I would suspect that it may be related to UN sanctions. Then it skips to a different subject, seemingly. The civil rights attorney, next line just says civil rights attorney, 13th District Senator, DNC, 13th District Senate of, now I'm struggling to recall if it was Missouri or Montana, but it doesn't matter. John Conyers, I think, was the one this was in reference to, because it goes on to say 13th District Senator, DNC, Hussein v. HRC v. McCain. Why is this relevant? I feel like there might be some strings missing, but the obvious one is that if John Conyers is in the midst of sexual harassment scandals, obviously that's related to the bigger thing unfolding. Him being in the Democratic National Committee, him being on that side of the aisle seems relevant. You know, if he might have posed some sort of serious obstacle to this, alliance plan of sorts, that might explain why he's in so much hot water now. The previous line, or next line rather, Hussein v. HRC v. McCain. We know from the context of this whole situation and from the other Q posts that there's corruption that is shared with those three entities. The question, why is this relevant? That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure, other than it's repeating something that we already know, but perhaps there's more to it. But at the very least, yeah, Barack Obama, Hillary Rodham Clinton, and McCain being next to each other in a single line, the connections are kind of obvious. Although they are joined by the letter V, which usually is versus. So I don't know. Maybe it's pointing to the fact that they are now in that way that an organized crime ring, at a certain point when it's about to go down, you'd have people, either taking each other out or vying to sell each other out. So that might be a situation now. They might be in some sort of race to narc on the others or take the others out, or who knows. But that's interesting because they're joined with the letter V, and I'm curious what that means. Follow the connections pre-prez. So what are the connections of these three people before Barack Obama became president, or before Trump became president, while Barack Obama was president? And this kind of ties into the next one, which I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. The question is asked, why does Barack Obama travel ahead of Trump? Why does he travel behind him? Think Asia, think North Korea. I'm more interested in North Korea at this point, so I'm going to kind of skip to that. Obviously, if Barack Obama is traveling to these places to exert some sort of influence, or try to countermeasure whatever Trump is doing, that would make sense. This was an interesting one, and I think this is worth spending a little bit of time on. Think Asia, think North Korea. What was told regarding North Korea during the past 8 years? What dramatic shift occurred regarding North Korea post-election of POTUS? And to me, this seems pretty obvious. When Obama was in office, there was flare-ups and scares about North Korea, but by and large, most of the quotes, which I look back and look to see if I could find, a lot of the quotes are reassuring people from Obama that the North Korea situation is contained. And then just to switch gears to the other Q post from the same day, which I'll also link to. What if North Korea had miniature nuke payload delivery in 2004? What if North Korea had ICBM capability since 2009? What if previous tests that failed were staged? Why is this relevant? Who is involved and why? Biggest cover-up in our history. U1-CA-EU-Asia/NK. Iran deal. Russian reset. That's a lot. That's a lot of information, but it's getting to the same thing, and I think in both posts you get the consistent presentation of North Korea, that they were probably already capable of a lot more than what we thought, and that there was a kind of stasis between North Korea and the U.S. that was largely hidden as far as the reasons why, that there were relationships that were, as it's pointed to, possibly the CIA pretty much running North Korea. Some people have kind of come with that perspective. um, uh, and Obama himself being quite influential as far as North Korea goes. And if this was while he was in office, imagine while he was in office, if he was able to really just pull the strings on North Korea the whole time, and we did not understand that that was the situation, it would change a lot. Um, so why is this relevant? Who is involved and why? Biggest cover up in history. Um, I'm there's parts of that I probably am not able to break down. Um, but it is interesting, and I think just the general situation that North Korea may have been way less of a threat than we thought, and then suddenly Trump takes office, which, this is switching gears back to the previous page. What was the shift? Well, while President Obama was in office, it seemed like North Korea was scary, but not a whole big deal just yet, and a lot of people were just kind of looking at their watches, waiting for it to go off. And then POTUS, Trump takes office, and then suddenly it's like we're on the brink of World War III. That, I think, would be the message that that North Korea's threat level seems to be just in the way that domestic false flag operations are used to kind of drum up fear. That was employed with North Korea to trick us, basically, to be afraid, to manipulate us, which is the name of the game. Then you have further down, reconcile, define hostage, sum of all fears. I've not seen the movie Sum of All Fears, but the plot's pretty easy to understand. You can read it in basically 3 minutes. And I think that pertaining to North Korea, there's an obvious connection there. In the basic plot of Sum of All Fears, it's a Jack Ryan CIA thriller. In this one, Ben Affleck plays Jack Ryan, and the basic plot is that a discovery of an old nuclear weapon that's untraceable because it was a lost American nuclear weapon is found and sold to an eccentric neo-Nazi billionaire, I think from Australia, not that that matters, who uses it to basically attack in such a way that it would be attributed to Russia, and only Jack Ryan is the one who sees this and tries to untangle it, but meanwhile the world is like marching towards war because of this false act. So what would that look like as far as North Korea? Could, as this is implying, could Obama be that eccentric billionaire who's actually in control of this nuclear weapon that can be attributed to a completely different group of people? I don't know. That to me, that makes sense as far as like what you might do if you had a country under your thumb that you could bring out as a boogeyman to act as a threat when you needed them. I mean, that does seem to be politically advantageous. So something to consider. The sum of all fears part, potentially using nuclear weapons to scare us into a certain narrative, that makes sense. Now, a different subject, but related. Why are sexual harassment claims all appearing suddenly? This, to me, makes so much sense. And to me, it seems like a nonviolent version of a dictatorship going through a purge. And I'm not necessarily trying to call the Trump administration a dictatorship in this context, because the whole Q narrative is kind of the opposite of that. But in that way that if they are, an alliance, and if there is some sort of, white hat elite that has a positive intention, then using this kind of tactic to purge public figures that would be that have reputable characters that could stand and oppose Donald Trump, and could do it in a way that's a war of public opinion, it would make sense that you would take those people out with something that they were already guilty of and that was just waiting to be exposed. So I think that in one sense the sexual harassment revelations are kind of an awakening for all of us, and in another sense it's a kind of political purge. Just not all of them are politicians, but they all play a role in mass media and shaping public opinion. Hollywood obviously is a big part of that. So that to me makes sense, that you would incorporate that part of it. So how do you remove? Yeah, that's the question. How do you remove your enemies from positions of influence and authority? In this case, it's through scandals. It seems. Define stages, define puppets, define handlers. Proxy war, proxy war, proxy war. Expand your thinking. Why is justice stalling release of sea-level info? Think, does POTUS control all matters classified? Think, have faith, these people are losers. I like that. So, getting to this part of it, it's with classified information coming out, JFK, being an example of that, if Donald Trump is releasing information regarding that or other things that are strategically to his advantage, or withholding things that are strategically to his advantage. That makes sense. So, it's not really any big smoking gun. These are just kind of general interpretations. But there were a few little details that I saw people missing that I wanted to include. And I think I'll leave it at that. I think that's the big scope of it. I don't want to take up too much more time, but I did want to connect it to consciousness, because I know there was at least one or two comments where people would point out, it's like, you kind of go off on these things and you're not really bringing it back around to consciousness. The sexual harassment component of it, to me, is one of the bigger aspects of a kind of door opening, a key to open a door. Understanding that our institutions were made up of people that were not good people, who by all appearances, have these stellar characters. I mean, some not so much, but they're in institutions where they have our respect and they have power, and they have power because we give it to them in many ways. So when that comes out that they're actually quite devious and pretty fucking evil to their fellow human beings, when it comes to sexual harassment, rape, and so forth, and a kind of systemic, institutionalized way of handling it with like the slush fund, in Congress using taxpayer money to settle sexual harassment lawsuits. I mean, that's particularly perverse. So with those kinds of revelations, I think the kind of consciousness, spiritual aspect of it is going to be a breaking down of false perceptions about other people, a kind of opening the door for not normalizing, but understanding that these kinds of things are more common than you might think. So you kind of maybe are a little bit more open to catching clues that they're happening, maybe in ways that you can help or notice for yourself. But understanding that they happen is a big crucial element. Getting your head around the fact that they do happen. So shaping a more dynamic, sometimes convoluted reality or model of reality, I think is part of this. Understanding that pockets of evil can exist within institutions that we might think of as by and large as good. So like the Matt Laur thing is an example. That man was so pristine, or eerily pristine in some ways, in the public view because of this persona that he put out. And then we understand that he seems to be not just like a run-of-the-mill like ass grabber. Like he seems to be like, one of the things is that he had a button in his desk. This is at least purported by one accuser, that a button in his desk that would lock the door, so he could lock a woman in the office with him and make a move. That's pretty fucked up. That takes planning. That's devious. You had to think about that. I mean, that's like people who, install cameras in their fucking bathrooms and, showers and stuff, and it's like, or go into locker rooms and set up hidden cameras. It's like, you had to think about that, and you had to get the technology to do it. It's pretty fucking devious, and this guy was famous for a long fucking time, so it's like, I realize all the F-bombs come out as I start talking about this, but I get kind of pissed off, but in keeping with the spiritual message, even Matt Laur deserves to be forgiven, if not necessarily dealt with, but, forgiven just the same, for your own sake of quality of consciousness. All right, 18 minutes. I've been all over the place. I did some Q analysis, some spiritual consciousness remarks. So, granted, this is kind of a mishmash, but I'll throw it out there anyway if anybody's interested in a couple of the Q details. And trying to forgive everyone and everything for your own sake. I don't know. It's fucking weird. The whole Q thing is strange. It's a strange world we live in. But try not to hold hard feelings against it and against everyone else. There are a bunch of deviants and dark motherfuckers in this world, but there's also light, and there's a lot of it, and more is coming.